Content warning, discussions of pain and torture. Everything started while Marcus was preparing dinner. Carrying his plate over to the table where he usually had dinner alone, he saw a man in a suit sitting across from where he sat. Sighing to himself, he sat his plate down and began eating his fried rice. The man was clearly doing this to try and create an air of menace and setting himself up to be a powerful man by breaking into Marcus's house without warning and sitting at the table. That probably would have worked if this hadn't already been done a dozen times over by a dozen different people. By now, Marcus knew how to win this game. As long as he focused on his fried rice and didn't address the man at the table, the man would lose some of his air of menace. Sure enough, the man's smile already faltered as Marcus ate. In his own home, Marcus wore sweatpants and a loose tank top, not bothering to wear his binder or hair tie. The man wore a spotless red suit with a purple tie, a black top hat, and cufflinks made of human teeth with diamonds embedded in the teeth shaped like the Latin letter C. The man practically oozed that he was wealthy and used to controlling others. The cufflinks told a message that the man profited off of the suffering of others. The red of the suit was supposed to remind Marcus of blood, but also to show that he was a wealthy man by having a suit just for meeting someone in their own home. The purple tie was treason within the 7 cities. One had to be a part of the emperor's family to wear purple. Purple fabric wasn't even able to be bought, and art stores were suspiciously lacking of any paint, markers, pencils, dyes, or pens in the color purple. So he wanted to show himself as someone able to obtain illegal items just because he could, while also being able to wear it publicly. So the longer Marcus refused to address him, the funnier this was going to get. Now finished with his rice, Marcus stood up, grabbing his plate and turning off the dining room light, leaving the man alone in the dark as he took the plate to the kitchen to clean it. While cleaning the plate, he became aware of the man's presence behind him. Humming to himself, he finished washing his plate, drying it off, and putting it away. It took nearly 5 minutes for him to do it correctly before he turned around and saw the man standing in the hallway. The man was no longer smiling, and he was tapping his foot in impatience, holding a file in his hand. Now with Marcus facing him, the man was expecting Marcus to finally address him. Sadly, the man would have to be disappointed. Turning the kitchen light off, Marcus slipped past the man, refusing to let the man keep his dignity by being rude in someone else's house. Marcus marched down his hallway and made it to the living room, turning on his television and sinking into his old chair. Now the man stomped into the living room and stood in the corner, while Marcus started streaming a monster marathon. I wonder how long he's going to stand there before speaking up, Marcus thought to himself. Turns out the answer to that question was 3.5 hours. In the middle of a movie with a murderous lycanthrope, the man finally did speak up. "Aren't you even going to say hello to me?" he said, still standing in the same corner. "That depends. Are you going to introduce yourself first?" The man sighed before starting. "Marcus Toon, Chief Investigator of the 5th Chapter of the Hunters Guild of Vespucci. I am Pious Poplicola, Plutocrat to the majestic master of Caligula's Carnival of Cannibalistic Carnage. I am here with a business proposition," Pious said, his pride in pain. "What is your proposition?" Marcus said, not looking up from the television screen. Pious sighed again before handing a file to Marcus. The front was marked as The Fortune Teller. While Marcus paused the stream to read over the file. Something he did appreciate about the plutocrats of Caligula's Carnival was that they liked to keep things organized for their own convenience, even though they treated the rest of the world like it ran for their convenience. The fortune teller was once a man, a long time ago, an augur who reads the futures through the entrails of animals, telling the future, for a price. He served a powerful prince who paid him well for his services. One day, though, the Agar told of a prophecy to the prince that was so horrid that the prince gouged out his own eyes rather than see that future come to pass. He then ordered his guards to remove the Agar's tongue and to screw a metal helm to the Agar's head. The screws tightened into the Agar's bones. The Agar, now unable to eat, see, or hear, was left to wander the palace, his hands always reaching out to guide him through the palace. But still, this wasn't enough for the prince, who knew that the Agar was still free to roam the palace even without his senses. So he had the Agar thrown into the deepest dungeon in the palace. Down there, the Agar was supposed to die, but instead he lived and kept on living. Down there, despite having no tongue, he still told prophecies to anyone who would listen, snatching at the rats and tearing them asunder, his whispers driving his jailers mad with the visions of the future. And still the Agar would not die. Even when the prince's great-grandson had perished from old age, the Agar did not die, and the Agares did not stop. Even when the kingdom was long since dead, and the castle abandoned and overgrown, the Agar did not die, and his whispers did not stop. It was here, in the abandoned dungeon, that the Carnival found the Agar, who had changed immensely. The helm was now a part of his body, skin having grown over the rusty metal. The Agar's hands had grown eyes and mouths, allowing the Agar to see and to eat. But whatever was in the man's mind was long since gone. Other than to tell prophecies, the Agar did not speak. He only screeched like a hurt animal. Despite the best efforts of the Carnival, the helm could not be removed, but the Agar could still be used by the Carnival. Now called the Fortune Teller, the monster was chained to its booth in the second circle of the Carnival. Here, people could have their fortunes read, for a price. The fortune teller still needed entrails for the auguries. The patrons could have an idea of their future read if they brought an animal for the fortune teller to disembowel with his own hands. Here, the fortune teller would use his hands to see the future, examining the entrails by touch and with the sight of his hands. And when he saw what he needed to see, he would bring both of his blood-soaked hands gently to the patron's cheeks, cupping them. The mouths in both of his hands gently whispered the patron's prophecy into their ears. Some patrons would be driven mad by their future. Others were inspired, and others would leave without comment. But most became obsessed with the fortune teller's futures, offering more and more for the auguries. But since this is Caligula's carnival, the price for better prophecies only rises. Most patrons who wanted to know their future in great detail needed to bring a sacrifice to the fortune teller, one of their own blood. Parents would bring their children to the fortune teller, watching the fortune teller disembowel their own flesh before the fortune teller's hands, coated in their own blood, cupped their faces and whispered of their entire future. Usually a terrible future caused by the death of their own child. Children would also bring their own parents to the fortune teller, willing to give up their bruises and broken bones to have their faces coated in blood one last time, to let go of their haunted past and to be whispered to how they can have the power to change their dark futures to a bright future. These patrons always leave with a smile. No matter how dark their future was, it was still brighter than their present. And it is the rare but most dangerous patron who would bring the one they loved to the fortune teller, someone close enough to be family and that they loved truly and deeply, and then sacrifice themselves to the fortune teller's auguries. Here, the fortune teller would tell their loved one not just of their future and how to change it, but how to control their own fate. These patrons, though so rare, are recognizable because the blood on their faces from the fortune teller's hands can never be washed away. The fortune teller had served Caligula's Carnival for millennia by this point, but last night a child approached the fortune teller, and after receiving the prediction, broke the locks on the fortune teller's chains. Both the child and the fortune teller escaped from Caligula's Carnival. When agents of the Carnival tried seeking them both out, they only found the remains of the child hanging from the branches of a tree at the edge of the northern forest. So, now unsure how to track the fortune teller through the wilds of the northern forest, the Carnival was seeking the help of the hunters. After all, the fortune teller can view the future anytime he examines a creature's entrails. According to legend, the Augarch was not able to see his own future. Whether or not that was true of the fortune teller was unknown, but assumed to still be true. Now, the rest of the documents in the file are about details of the fortune teller's escape and present location that they were aware of. The fortune teller was believed to be in a canyon within the northern forest, about 100 kilometers northwest from the border of the Seven Cities. Even knowing this, it was well over 100 square kilometers that would have to be searched to find the fortune teller. They couldn't even get more precise because every clown tracker they sent into the canyon had never returned. So now the plutocrats of the Carnival were asked to hire outside help. The final page of the file had a picture of the fortune teller, along with the reward money listed. The picture of the fortune teller showed metal plates screwed over where the eyes and the mouth were, leaving only a small slit for the nose so that he could breathe. But looking closer at the photo, Marcus could see that it wasn't a metal plate screwed into the skin. That was the exposed plates that broke out of the skin. The rest of the metal was underneath the skin, causing the skin to bulge and bruise in odd places. The fortune teller's hands were also visible. In the palms of each hand was a round, open mouth with visible, sharp, needle-like teeth in the palm of the fortune teller. No eye could be seen to Marcus, but the fortune teller likely had a way of sensing things with his hands. Still, even with no eyes, Marcus had a feeling that the fortune teller was staring down the photographer. The reward underneath the picture was a bit more interesting. 100,000 if dead, 250,000 if captured. Marcus sighed and closed the file. Pious was staring at him, smiling eagerly. "So, you think your team can try to capture the fortune teller?" Pious asked. Marcus pinched his nose as he asked his own question. "Let me guess, you want us to do everything we can to capture it, and if we don't succeed, you want us to bring proof of the fortune teller's death, probably by his severed head?" "Well, I was going to ask for his severed hands, but if all you can manage is a severed head, I'll accept it. And with all due respect, Mr. Poplicola, the amount feels a little low. We usually charge more than 100,000 centi for hunting a monster in the northern forest." Pious's smile vanished at those words as he processed Marcus's insult. "Do you think I'm a cheap man, Mixcoatl? I don't deal with anything as cheap as centi. The reward is in auras. 200 million centi for the proof of the fortune teller's death. 500 million centi to bring the fortune teller back alive," Pious clarified. Marcus was no longer so bored anymore. "Well, I will need to talk to Mixcoatl and Sochi first, but I cannot see any reason why we cannot at least try to check it out. But we would need a non-refundable deposit made by check. I think 50,000 is a fair percentage, whether we kill it or capture it. Sure, I can write the check now. 50,000 centi, right? Pius said with a massive grin while his hand slipped into his jacket, withdrawing a checkbook and a golden fountain pen while he started writing on the paper. 50,000 auras. Now is not the time to be cheap, Marcus warned Pius. He knew Pius was probably joking, but he dealt with people from the esoteric community enough to know that if there was a loophole, they'd take it in a moment. Pius chuckled and tore away the check to hand it to Marcus, who read it over, and sure enough, it had the right amount of zeros. Lifting his eyes to look at Pius, he found that the man had vanished as mysteriously as he appeared. Dramatic as ever. Knock next time, Marcus called out loud before he took out his phone to start calling his cousin Mixcoatl about the new job.